ready to go?
Sure. Is this going to be the crowd?
Well, there's more people outside. But Lakeside, typically they climb just slowly past the start time.
Do you want to wait a couple minutes until they get in, or it's your call? Whatever.
They're rolling in. Who am I want to be started?
Okay, great.
I'll just do a quick intro and then off to you.
Sure.
Well, good morning, everyone. It's good to see you. My name is John Mann, Director of Education for Lakeside. For today, originally, of course, Elizabeth Meyer Hendrickson was scheduled to speak, but of course is under the weather. But I am very thankful that Kurt Prendergast was able to give a talk this morning during Journalism and Media Literacy Week. And for today's session, Kurt will talk on what happened to the hometown newspaper. Kurt is co-founder of the Tucson Agenda, daily newsletter focused on government and politics in Tucson, Arizona. I do ask, as always, if you please mute your cell phone ringers. When it comes to Q&A, since since it's virtual, I will have to come to you with the mic. Otherwise, he nor anyone else in here will hear the question. With that, Kurt Pendergast.
All right. All right. Good morning, everybody. As you said, my name is Kurt Prendergast, and I'm calling to you today from Tucson. We're talking about what happened to the hometown newspaper, and I'm so grateful that I get to talk to you about this. I'm so happy to be here, and I'm so happy that some of you are interested in this because the hometown newspaper, this is very dear to my heart. I have worked at hometown newspapers for the last dozen years or so, and I just have lived and breathed local journalism. And so, as you all, as I'm sure in your towns, have seen your newspapers just get thinner and thinner and thinner, and sometimes just disappear entirely, I have been on the inside of that. So, I have seen the walls close in, close in, close in. I think about this all the time, and I'm really grateful for the chance to kind of gather my thoughts, put it all together, and share it with you. So, what I would like to do today is I'll tell you about my professional experience, where I'm coming from. Then we will look at some of the research so that you get kind of an idea of the scope of this, the nationwide scale of local news. And then I'm going to get into kind of like behind the scenes of how this kind of decline has happened. After that, I really want to get into the Q&A with you all. Journalism is a dialogue, and so I really look forward to you asking me questions, and I will answer absolutely any question you have about local journalism. So let's get into it. So today is going to be a bit of a a little doom and gloom. Tomorrow is the future of journalism, and that's where I am optimistic about the state of affairs and what can happen. But we do have to recognize the hole that we're in before we can kind of find the solutions and get out of it. So here are just like some broad numbers of what's going on in local news. And these numbers here, they come from the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern University. All the numbers that I'm going to talk about today come from Northwestern University or the Pew Research Center, which are very reputable organizations. So look at that right there. Every month, 10 local newspapers close. So that's 10 communities who no longer have somebody going to city council meetings, nobody going out and covering what the police are doing, what the school boards are doing. All of that is just gone. And it's not new. 2,900 newspapers have closed since 2005. And I think if we were to go back another 20 years, that number would get even larger. But we are in a 20-year slide of local news. Newspapers are closing all the time. And this is something that in the journalism world, this just gives me shivers every time I see this. And it happens all too often. And so what's left is we have 6,000 newspapers, but that's a little bit misleading. That's not 6,000 local newsrooms staffed by longtime editors and hungry reporters out there chasing stories. The vast majority of those are weeklies who I'm sure they're doing the best they can, but they're going to be writing a lot about concerts and community events and things like that. And that's all well and good, but it's not doing that public service journalism that I think is the most important. So as a result, half of the counties in the country don't have a daily news outlet. Entire counties, they don't have one. So I want to show you what this looks like. This is the map of from the Medill local journalism project that they do every year. And can you see that the yellow squares are where there are no news outlets? The grays are there where there is one news outlet, and the purple is where there's at least two. And I want us to take a moment to just kind of soak in this map because as I was preparing for this presentation, I found myself kind of mesmerized by this, and there is just a lot to take away from it. One of the big things is if you look in the Southeast, look at how many areas don't have any news outlets, or they just have one. That is a huge swath of the country. Like, look at Georgia. There are only a handful of counties in Georgia that have at least two news outlets. So this is getting to like one of the major problems in our country that I see is that there's people just don't have any access to local news. And I think what ends up happening is you look at national news. They can all get CNN, they can all get New York Times, they can all get Fox, but there's no local news outlet telling them what the school board's doing. So all the news they get is national. And then if you look out in the West, where the counties are just way larger than they are in the East, look at how many counties don't have any news outlets. Look at the Texas border. I know a lot of people in Ohio and the rest of the entire country are very interested in border news, but look at that. Oh, and you know what? I just remembered, I need to tell you a little bit about myself first. I get too into this. Sorry about that. So I'm Kurt Prendergast. My apologies. I have worked in local news for 12 years or so. I started out at the Nogales International, which is down right on the border in Santa Cruz County, Arizona. I worked there for like 3 years. I wrote 2 stories a day for almost every single day of those years. So that was a constant hustle. I was out there covering the local school board, city council meetings. I was there. The Santa Cruz County supervisors. I was covering a woman turning 103 years old. All of that stuff, all the community news. And from there, I went up to the Arizona Daily Star, which is the Metro Daily in Tucson. That serves, while the Nogales International is a community of, it serves about 50,000 people. The Arizona Daily Star serves about a little over 1 million people live in Pima County. And when I was there, I continued to cover the border. I covered federal courts, transportation, local government, and just kind of anything and everything that you can think of that a local newspaper could cover. And a year ago, a colleague of mine, we started the Tucson Agenda, which is it's a newsletter. So it's on a platform called Substack. And so what we do is we are completely focused on local government in Tucson and Southern Arizona, as well as nonprofits that do like kind of social services and kind of fill in the gaps that government doesn't quite fill. And so that's a newsletter that we send out 5 days a week. And we're doing really well. We have been embraced by our community, and we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of paid subscribers. And we have about 4,000 total subscribers. And so that's our daily hustle, is I am now out covering the Tucson City Council, Pima County Board of Supervisors. I am in like the trenches, so to speak, of local journalism. So now back to the map. I'm sorry for doing that out of order. But yeah, if you look at the map, out in the West, how many of these counties, how many of those yellow counties do you see? Look at the gray out there. You all are kind of in a good spot. And it looks like the upper Midwest is one of the best places to be in terms of local journalism, where counties have at least 2 outlets. But look at Idaho. Look at that. Look at all that yellow. Look at all that gray. They're just huge areas that don't have like any real news. And bear in mind that a lot of the news outlets that are included in those purples are going to be weeklies. So when you see purple, that doesn't necessarily mean that there is somebody out there covering local government the way you think that it's supposed to be covered. We're in bad shape. We're in a big hole. So I want to move on to get a little more focused on you all. This is Ohio. All right. So according to Medill, in Ohio, there are 73 daily newspapers. I think Ohio has about 12 million people, give or take, 11, 12. You have 87 weeklies, 18 digital sites. You have 3 counties that have no news outlets, and about half of the counties have just one. And as the Medill people point out, is a lot of these newspapers that still exist, they're in metro areas. Rural areas are completely underserved. It looks like that's the case in Ohio as well, along with the rest of the country. So I want to give you all kind of the broad view, broad historical view of how we got to the point where we have a map like that, where there are so many areas that either don't have any news outlets or they just have a weekly or just not being served. And a lot of this, I'm sure that you've all lived through this, but I just want to do like the big forces that have pushed us to where we are today. So the thing that I see is, about 40, 50 years ago, broadcast television, the newspapers kind of have a monopoly on local news. Broadcast TV comes on the scene, and all of a sudden people can actually be taken to the place where the event is happening. They can now have a reporter who is physically standing in front of the car wreck outside City Hall or whatever. And that's a value that newspapers don't bring, right? It's all, we can write longer stories, more detailed stories, we can get more nuanced, but we can't bring you to that place, right? At least in terms of print. So broadcast TV comes on, they have in some ways a better product. It's not as in-depth as print journalism, of course, but like that's a good product. Cable TV, we have CNN, early 90s. They come on the scene and they just change the game. All of a sudden you can have news coming in 24 hours a day. Broadcast TV was kind of, like maybe an hour a day at most. You have news magazines also, but cable TV, now it's a 24-hour game and they have to fill that up. And so that's where you get this, in the news business, we have a thing called a news hole, which is how much space you need to fill. So in a newspaper, it's measured in column inches. So it's, give or take like 100 column inches per page of a newspaper. And then you have ads. And so you might end up with, 30, 40, 50, 60 inches of column space that you have to fill. And so ideally you're trying to fill that with local news, but as is the case more and more, is it gets filled with Associated Press, with wires, just stuff about like out here in Tucson, we might get news about a snowstorm in Ohio, or a tornado somewhere or things like that. And that starts filling in the news hole. But the news hole is something that every editor across the country is thinking about all day long, is how do I fill that news hole? With cable TV, the news hole is 24 hours of news is what they're filling. And so I believe that's why you see so many hour-long programs that are like 5 people chattering away at each other, is because you kind of just have to fill in all this time, But the big thing, the kind of the era that we're living in right now is the internet era. And so the internet just completely scrambled the news business for newspapers. There are many books written about this, and there will be many more of it. But when the internet comes on the scene, all of a sudden, you can now just go to your computer and you can with a click of the mouse, you can get the news. You don't have to have a year-long subscription to a newspaper, wait for it to land with the flood on your driveway, go out, pick it up, peruse what's in there. It's now just instantaneous access. And so it's kind of, in terms of a product for the local news consumer, it is faster and it's more visual. You can include videos, you can do a lot more photos, and the news hole is now limitless. You can write thousands and thousands and thousands of words if you want about any news topic. And there's a lot to that. There's good and bad to that for sure. But so in terms of the product, internet offers something new, instantaneous. But then also what it really did is on the business side. And I don't know how many people, heard about this or remember it, but Craigslist is, where you can go online. It's a very cheap website. It's very simple. It's been around forever. And if you want to sell your old piano, or you're looking for a nanny or whatever, you can go there, and it's free, and you can reach a huge audience, a huge local audience immediately. And actually, I'm sorry, I don't say if it is free. But that was a huge revenue stream for newspapers, the classified ads. That was such a dependable stream of money coming in. And Craigslist came on the scene and just kind of took it. And so the newspapers got hit really hard. It was just kind of cutting their legs out. And there's many other examples of this. But there also we have newspapers used to be the place where you would get not only your local news, but you would get your national news. That's where you follow along with what's going on in Congress or the scandals in Washington, D.C. or whatever you're interested in. And not just national, international. You know, if you wanted to follow, there's a war in Europe or Africa or wherever, and you're interested in that, you would have your local news would be the one that would be gathering in, the wire service reports, and you could read about it there. And obviously, people can still subscribe to the New York Times, watch the Post, and all that. But this was something that local newspapers could depend on. Like they were the source for this, and some newspapers still kind of try to be that source. But in reality, most people can just go online and read about stuff happening halfway across the world instantaneously. And then the most recent thing that we're living in right now is social media. As you're all aware, particularly, around the time of the 2016 presidential election, this was on the top of everybody's mind. People's opinions getting warped by stuff being put on social media. And that was about some very specific pernicious things that were being done. But just broadly put, this is where people go to get news. Wake up in the morning and you scroll through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever you're interested in, and this is kind of what you start imbibing news, or pseudo news before you, and you're just scrolling through, and you just by scrolling through, depending on what you put in your feed, you could have access to 100 different news sites. You might not be able to actually click and read them. There might be paywalls. But you can get the gist of what they report, and you can get the headlines, get a sense of what's going on. And so this is, again, it's just replacing the role that local news filled. And so all of this leads to the hole that we're in. And this is what it looks like in my world. What all this leads to is layoffs. And layoffs of reporters and designers and all the people who put together the newspaper for you every day. And so if you just look here, we have back in January, there was 500 journalists were laid off. You have Everett Herald up in Washington, they got bought out, and they got over half of their news staff was laid off just a few days ago. And that is now, I believe they're striking. That one is going to be, that's going to hurt that community quite a bit. And then we have, it's not just newspapers, it's also like the weeklies. This one in St. Louis, they got sold, and a lot of their staff got laid off. They were around for 46 years, which is kind of the era of the weeklies. I hope it doesn't come to an end, but the weeklies can be great publications. And then if you look up at the top right-hand corner there, the 25% of Arizona Daily Star newsroom laid off, that one is me. I was part of that. That was in April 2023. I got a phone call saying that I'd done a good job, blah blah blah, but they were cutting staff, and they kind of chopped at that time I was the opinion editor for the newspaper, and they kind of chopped the head off of the local newspaper, and this was done by the corporate honchos who kind of pull all the strings, and so that is what led me to launch the Tucson Agenda. I needed a job. I really like where I live. I love local reporting. A colleague of mine also was looking to start something new. And so we kind of, Phoenix from the ashes came out of that. And then this one, I hope this isn't an overwhelming slide for you all, but it is just something that is repeated over and over and over in the local journalism world. And it plays out kind of like I'm sketching here of, you have the loss of revenue that leads to layoffs. You have fewer reporters, means there's less news you can report, which means there's less news in the newspaper when the newspaper gets thinner and thinner. And when I was the opinion editor and even to today, this is something that I hear from readers just absolutely constantly, the word thinner. some people try to say it's so thin it's almost see-through. It's almost tissue paper thin. But there's just less and less local news being reported. And then if you, as a subscriber, what are you supposed to do? You're paying a lot of money, and it can be a lot of money to subscribe to a print publication for a year. And so you get less news. The product is getting worse and worse and worse. And so you're faced with that choice of, do I stick with this publication that costs me hundreds of dollars every year? Or am I getting enough from my Facebook feed? Am I happy just getting like the New York Times? And so I have the view of the National, and that's great. And if you have the thinner paper, what's the cost of not getting it? If you're subscribing to a local newspaper and they're not reporting on local news, then kind of what's the point? That's one of the complaints that I hear from readers too, is if you're mainly interested in the national news, you're gonna read about it online before that newspaper lands on your driveway in the morning. It's going to be old news. So you have subscribers leave, and when subscribers leave, that means there's fewer eyeballs on the newspaper, which means it's less enticing to advertisers. So over time, the advertisers start to leave, and that means that there's less revenue coming in, which means that they are going to start cutting staff, which means you have a thinner paper, subscribers leave, advertisers leave, loss of revenue. And this has just been going on and on and on and on for so many years. I kind of became a professional journalist in around 2010 or so. And so I kind of came on where this wasn't new, but it was still it was kind of concerning. Oh man, this is happening. Now, after all this time, this is just the absolute norm. This is just what's happening day in, day out across the country. This is why you see all those headlines right there of all these layoffs. So this is something that I'm trying to do the view from the corporate office, view from inside the newsroom, that type of thing. So this is kind of a very much behind the scenes view of the the corporate decisions that shape the thinning of your newspaper. So chances are, wherever you live, your newspaper is not owned by the Wilson family that has owned it for many, many years. It could be in some cases. More than likely, the newspaper that you read was established decades and decades and decades and decades ago. The Arizona Daily Star, I think, was 1870s, something like that. And that was like a golden age of newspapers launching, and a lot of them have stuck around. It's pretty impressive. But it's no longer the people who founded it now pass it on generation. The newspapers are owned by chains for the most part. Here in Arizona, we have newspapers that are owned by Lee Enterprises, which is a national chain that owns something like 80 publications. And then we have some that are owned by Gannett, which owns way more, but more than likely the newspapers that you guys are reading, are owned by Gannett or Lee. We also have a Wick, the Wick family. They own newspapers out here. They own, I don't know, a handful in Arizona, and they own throughout the West. And that is a family that has passed from generation to generation. But there are, if you live in North Dakota where they have a paper, the owners of that paper are not local, right? They're from Arizona. And so you have all these huge chains that own the newspapers. So we've been talking about print a lot, but obviously newspapers are not just print. They're online as well. And so when you have a chain that owns these newspapers, a couple of things happen. One thing is, if you notice that a lot of newspaper websites look alike, one of the big reasons is these chains kind of contract out with a service provider to have the website look a certain way. They standardize it across their all of their newspapers. And so that makes it easier for them. They can slot in ads that go across the entire country. They don't have to work out exactly where it's going to go with each newspaper. They can just click of a button and it'll appear right here on every single publication. But what it does is it strips away the local ability to adapt. Like a newspaper in in Lakeside, for example, if they're owned by a chain, they might want to have in their website about the lake. You could have a live stream of the lake in the background if you wanted to, if you're able to. But you wouldn't be able to if you were owned by a national chain. They wouldn't. There's no space for that. There's no technical ability to do that. That is something I always railed against when I worked for the Metro Daily, is that we needed to be able to have like our own flavor, of our website, but it was just that door was closed. So that they have these chains that own a lot of newspapers, and they get chains up until a couple of years ago. We had a big long stretch where chains were just gobbling each other up. And one of the things that they would do is they would take on debt to buy other chains. And then once they bought the new chain, they had to start paying off that debt. And that meant, cutting newsroom staff and shrinking their operations to pay down the debt. It's a bizarre situation, but I'm sure in the rest of the business world, something like that happens as well. But it was bizarre to see a corporate owner come in and start cutting because they needed to be the ones to own this publication. It's crazy. But even behind that is a lot of these chains are publicly traded companies. So the hedge funds, capital management, all that type of stuff. They are huge investors in newspaper chains. And so there's still some independence, the boards of the chains, they still, are up there trying to stand up for journalism and, the journalistic values and things like that. Whereas the hedge funds they're doing what they do. Their job is to find assets, get money from those assets, buy low, sell high. And so some of them are more activists, some of them are not. Some of them there's a name down here at the bottom, like Carlo Canal. They're trying to push newspaper chains to fully embrace going online, whereas the newspaper chains are saying, no, we want to hold on to print. That's where we get most of our revenue. A lot of ad dollars come into print, whereas online, it's just they've never really figured out how to make a lot of money from online advertising. That game is not resolved. So the hedge funds come in, they buy up the big chunks of the chains. So it's kind of like big fish gobbling up smaller fish, smaller fish. And so they keep printing, right? They are tied to print. And this is a topic that I have just gone back and forth over for years and years. And it is true that this is where the print is where the money comes in. Print is how people have established decades-long relationships with their newspapers, and I respect that relationship. I also, in my generation, I was one of the stragglers where I was a defender of print longer than many other of my peers. But over the last several years, I have become more and more. Print is. I think that print is in a way holding back the next step in local journalism. If local newspapers would fully embrace their online presence, they would be able to adapt, innovate, and they could be serving such a better product to the local audience. And so you have all the chains come in, the hedge funds come in, and what they want to do, they want to cut, right? This is that vicious cycle, the layoffs. And I'm speaking generally, there's obviously there are layoffs, and then newspapers will fill in some of those gaps. So generally, they hire younger reporters who are less expensive than the older reporters, but that's how it goes. And then from the inside of the newsroom, it's that centralized. I don't know how aware people are of this, but everything that in a newsroom that does not have to be done in that newsroom, the chains are trying to pull into a central office. So things like copy editing, which is checking for spelling errors. Hopefully, if you have that level of copy editing, is being is this actually right? This doesn't seem right to me. I've talked to the reporter keeping track of screw ups by reporters. That also is something that copy desk would do. They're also the ones who write headlines. So you want to get that local, just that chuckle that you get from a great local headline. That is something that copy editors would do. Designers, people who are trying to figure out a way to put together the page so that it's visually appealing, so that it highlights the most important news of the day. It keeps the secondary stuff also on the page. The ones who are kind of the editors are saying, okay, we want this up, the top left rail or whatever, and that's where that should go. And they're the ones who make it look right, make sure everything fits. That's something that can be done virtually, right? So that gets centralized, that gets sent to an office somewhere besides the town where the newspaper is operating. And this is the Tucson right there. This is something that is emblematic of the process here in Tucson. Because I don't know if you know this, but that is misspelled. Right? Tucson is Tucson, and that has appeared in our local paper multiple times this year, where the paper has misspelled the name of the town that we live in. And local readers notice that. They highlight that. And as I want to be fair, all right, is because I love our local newspaper, even though they laid me off, or the corporation laid me off. I love them. I want them to succeed. It's, absolutely. But it's also just from the outside, you just see it. It's such a crack in the system. And it and it's not the only thing. Like you see headlines that are like that. The story is actually the opposite of that. Or you see like little pieces of text that are in there that shouldn't be in there. And I do not know what's going on inside the newsroom, but this is the type of thing that happens when you do not have the local people doing the copy editing design, creating the product. So instead, it's somebody in some other state, it's just somebody who is dealing with like 100 different things from 100 different cities every day, and they're just trying to get through it all. And they have no frame of reference. They have no context for what they're dealing with, and you get a misspelled name of the city. And then, so down at the bottom here, I wanted to highlight some names for you. One of my big goals today and just always is I want people to understand that the news business is not just some like big monolithic thing. It's made up of people or organizations, and they have competing interests. Not everybody's moving in the same direction. And you will see changes in your local newspaper that are not the result of choices made in your town, in your local newspaper. But if no one is out there highlighting it, it goes unsaid and goes unknown. So this one here, the Alden Global Capital, that one some of you may have heard of. This is what's known as a vulture fund. So particularly, there was like, I think, a 5-10 year period a few years ago where they were buying up newspapers. I think it was, I don't want to misspeak, but I think like the Denver Post, and there was a bunch of them. And what they would do is they're essentially buying a brand name. And so they go in, they say, this is how much that we should be spending in this newspaper. Now get to that number. And so that leads to the layoffs, the cuts, all this stuff. And not to mention, another thing that happens is the newspapers have to sell their building, right? Now the Star had to do that. Most newspapers have to do that. They just, like the Los Angeles Times, I believe, they had a premier, beautiful building, and then they sold it and moved it, outside of town. So that there's all these cost-cutting things that have to happen. And Alden Global Capital is kind of like the face of that process. And so that's one that, like, if you ever see it, you should be like, okay, all right. I know that name. They're the vulture funds. And as I talk about them, it breaks my heart what they do to local newspapers. But as time has gone by, I've just come around more and more to they're doing this because this is what they do. If newspapers are publicly traded assets, that's what people are going to publicly trade those assets. Like that's what they're going to do. It's a business. And so there's the part of journalism that I love, that I thrive on, that rejuvenates me every single day, is just not part of this calculation, but this is a legitimate calculation. And then we have Quint Digital. This is an Indian company that has recently come on the scene, and they're buying up stock in newspaper chains. So I don't know a whole lot about them. I kind of touched on them a couple weeks ago. They could be very interesting. They seem to be a very cutting edge, innovative company. I am a little bit concerned about the use of AI, but I don't know. But that's a name to keep an eye on. You're probably going to see that, Quint Digital. And then we have Carlo Cannell and Harris Kupperman. Again, these are guys just doing what they do. They're hedge fund people, and they're big stock owners in newspaper chains. But if you look at like financial news at all, it's very interesting to dip into financial news if you're interested in like the news business, because you can see all these like people will buy like 8% of this chain and making big purchases, and then there is like the cascading effect of that will be more than likely nobody's covering high school sports in your town, and you have no idea what Tucson City Council is doing. That's what these people are not concerned with that so much. They're Alden Global, Quint, hedge funds, they're just trying to make money. And you can make money in the news business. Historically, newspapers where you just make 20, 30% profit every year. And a lot of newspapers still do turn a profit, just not as much as they used to. Yes, so I want to get into the newsroom because to me, the newsroom is one of the most sacred, wonderful places, I think high points of Western civilization. The newsrooms are amazing, and I every single day miss being in the newsroom. Newsroom is a place where you are surrounded by people who are doing what you're doing. You don't need to explain so much, like why things are important. Everybody just gets it. You get to listen to other reporters making phone calls. There's one guy, fantastic, super longtime professional, was great. Just very brusquely talking to sources. Whereas with me, I'm on the younger side. I was like very cautious about trying to be super polite to everybody and all that. And he is just like, okay, fine. Just he gets what he wants, and he's very good at what he does. So the sources respect him, and he can be brusque. We also have I used to work next to this woman who she did a lot of like really like human stories, and she would talk to people who had lost a loved one. Like the brother or sister died in a car wreck, or was shot and killed, or something. Something bad happened. And I got to sit next to her while she talked to them. And I could see just like the seasoned compassion that she would have with them, where you could tell like she felt it. She stayed professional. Her job was to like get their information, and get it into the news story. But that kind of experience, you cannot just wake up and do that. It takes years. Some people are geared to do that type of work more than others. But no matter what, you got to do it a lot of times, and you got to know a lot about yourself to be able to talk to someone in a sincere way. You got to know a lot. You have to see clearly what your job is, so that you can get that information without being coarse with them, but also not like overly sympathetic to the point of being unprofessional. In this area, you got to get right through there. Also, one other story I always think about is I ended up writing a story with an older guy who'd been doing it for years. He's a great writer, and we kind of like wrote it together. We did the reporting together, and then we kind of put together like a draft. And then when it came time to like finally write it and publish it, I'm sitting next to him, and we're doing the editing, and he just saw the story so clearly. And as he's like rewriting things, it really looked like he was playing the piano on the keyboard. It was just the level of experience that you get exposed to in a newsroom is irreplaceable. And so when I see these like the newspapers closing, like what I see is not only like the cost to the public, but also like that space, like that newsroom is no longer there. And that's very tragic to me. I'm also get a little emotional talking about that. But in terms of the business side of it, I'm using the word pivot there because this is what this is what corporate people tell local newsrooms to do. The most salient example for me is video. This would come up every year or two where we were told that we needed to start shooting videos. And we're all print people, we're all writers, and we're not trained to do videos, but this was like the thing. And then all of a sudden we're supposed to be doing this thing we're not good at all. We don't really get trained to do, and we all know that eventually this is just going to disappear. Because honestly, I feel like these types of things are done so that somebody somewhere gets a bonus for having such a great idea, for getting more clicks or whatever, but it's not really, integral to the mission of local journalism. That's not to say that things like video don't add a lot of value, but you need to have somebody who's good at it, doing it in order for it to have value. And then as we have the newsroom shrink, as we get these weird directives from on high, the mission endures. When you think about local newsrooms, I'll bet you $1 billion that the people who are doing that job, like in your local newspaper, are doing the best they can, that they feel it, that they're trying to like get you the information that you need. Like it's a daily struggle. But when you are constantly jerked around and when the walls keep closing in, closing in, closing in, it's harder to have that like vibrant spirit of this is our mission, this is what we're doing every day. But again, people are working hard. And then another thing that I think about constantly is the writing. We can point to all these things that are the reasons that newspapers are folding, the corporate, the online, all that type of stuff. But something that I see every day and something I hear a lot from readers is the writing. It's so hard to read so many news stories that in my mind, there's a certain amount of work that needs to get done that involves the writer and the reader. And the writer should be doing all of that work. The reader should be able to just boom, open this story up, and it is just evident what's going on. Plain English, clear, like you just moving from top, boom, 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 boom. But I am astounded by how many stories I read that I like have to reread, a few times. Or there's no like order to it, and I just struggle with it. And for years and years, I would kind of feel bad that like, oh man, I should know more, or maybe like I'm not smart enough to understand this or whatever. And that's not true. It's not true for anybody. It's the writing is cluttered. It's not thought through. And as we look at why newspapers are, going extinct in a way, this is something that has to be part of that conversation. It's not just the big forces at work. It's that it is like hard to read the news. Not only is a lot of it very depressing news, but also like just trying to read it, oof, that's tough. And then Haunted by the Past. This is something that I think is pretty pervasive. Newspapers used to be the only game in town. Even when the TV and stuff like that came along, there was still like you would go to the newspaper to get like the real story, the nuance, the in-depth, the analysis. And as newspapers shrink, there's that memory of like what we used to do, what we did that was so great before, and that's just always around, and it gets heavy because that what you're doing right now is not nearly as good as what it was, and you can make there's rational explanations for that are beyond any reporter or editor's control, but it also like it weighs you down. It's hard. You want this to be the best thing, that every single day you want this to be the best newspaper you ever put out, but day after day after day, and you see it just kind of diminish in quality. It's tough. And then the farm system breaks down. This is where this is for young reporters coming and getting into training. When you don't have young reporters, they're hungry. Their main thing is they need to get the experience to like know how to write a story, and then they also need to get their name out there. They need that byline. They need what we call clips. They need to create this portfolio so that if they want to work somewhere else, they can point to this work that they did. If they don't have that work, it's extremely hard to get a job. So you have to do that internship. You got to do your ground level, like write cost briefs, like just like the simplest stuff, whatever needs to get done. Young reporters come in and they do that work, and then if they're like they like it, maybe they go one way until they do this beat, or they're like, oh, this was really great, but what I actually do is I want to live over in a different city, or I want to cover this thing, and the most interesting place to cover that thing is over there. So they move around, and that's all great. What that needs though is it needs editors and reporters to guide them, to be mentors to them. And if you have fewer reporters and editors in the newsroom, who are already strapped and they're just overloaded with work. That's less time and energy that can go to training the next generation of reporters. And so you have, I see this out here, is we have a lot of young journalism students who they're going to try. They're going to try to get into the news business, and some of them will, but a lot of them are going to go do public relations, or they're going to go completely outside the journalism industry. And I see them, and I see a lot of them where I'm like, if you had a shot for like a year, you could get trained up and you could do a good job. And somewhere in the country, there would be some community where you would land, and they would get to know what their what their city council is doing. But that person never gets the chance, and there's nowhere for them to go. Even if it's like at this paper, there's not enough reporters and editors to mentor them. It's also like, where are they going to go? The newspapers keep shrinking, so there's fewer opportunities. And so this is one of those generational problems that we really need to keep on our radar, is that there are fewer opportunities for people to get into the journalism game. And so at the top, we have all these, the older reporters who've been doing this for decades, they're retiring, they're getting bought out. And you have like the mid-career people like me who are kind of like moving through as well. But coming in behind us are fewer and fewer reporters. And a lot of times the young reporters, if you're 22, you might not be super interested in covering the city council in a town of 15,000 people. That might not be the most enticing thing for you. You want to go live in New York, or something like that, someplace exciting, and be in your 20s and all doing all that. But it used to be that you would get at least some who would want to go work in that small town. But with fewer and fewer opportunities, that means that's fewer and fewer of those people as well, which also means in terms of quality of reporting is you don't have people who had to go out and cover like a city council in a town of 15,000 people, and then they did really well, and then they moved to a town of 50,000 and then 100,000, and then they're like, they've worked their way up over the course of a decade to where when they land at the New York Times, they are seasoned, they've been through it all, they know how everything works. That system is breaking down. It's been breaking down for a really long time. And I would venture to say that if you were to dig into a lot of like the bylines you see in the big newspapers, a lot of them are, particularly for kind of like simple stories, are going to be people in their 20s who kind of went to a good school and then got hired by the big paper, but they weren't put through the ringer. They weren't put through like that grind of having to deal with people face to face, like a local mayor or whoever. Like reporting on people that you see at the grocery store is a unique experience, and that will keep you honest. Reporting on people who live 1,000 miles away, you can kind of get away with saying a lot of stuff. But when you're in the produce section and you bump into that person that you wrote about, you better have been very fair and very accurate. Anyway. So yeah, so this is you all. This is the public. What I've got here are some of the comments that we've got from people who have paid to subscribe to our newsletter. And again, I love the Star. Like I want them to succeed wholeheartedly. But I wanted to share these with you because this is what happens. This is what we hear from readers. Like time to support alternatives to the Star, which is dying. We cannot become a news desert. The idea that the news desert is a term that is used a lot in our current period of the decline of newspapers. That's those areas on that map where there is either no outlet or there's one outlet. It's just kind of a place in the country, and there are a lot of them where there just is nobody covering local government or what happened with that wreck down on County Line Road. You know what I mean? Like there's just nobody doing that. And so that's a news desert. And so, highlighting journalism keeps government honest and the viability of democracies. That is a thing that I've been focused very much on local journalism. This is about the hometown paper. But I really do think that one of the things that we're seeing on the national stage is the result of the hollowing out of the local news. If you don't have anybody telling you what's going on locally, the only thing that you're going to hear is the national. And when I was the opinion editor, one of the things that I would do every day is I would deal with letters to the editor. which I simultaneously loved and dreaded. It is it is a vibrant conversation about, from the local community, and it was an honor to get to deal with that. But it was also a lot of people getting upset if we didn't run their letter, or just like it was great. Um, but one of the things that I noticed there was very few letters dealt with local topics. Um, Kind of, I'll bet you like a good portion of the letters that dealt with local topics were somebody saying like, "Hey, I just wanted to thank the so and so organization for putting on this event. It was so great. It highlighted this thing that needed to be highlighted." Which is all well and good, but you don't get that. We didn't get that much about just like the day-to-day functioning of local government, things that you liked, things that you didn't. It just wasn't part of it. What we did get was a lot of letters about Trump, a lot of letters about like what's going on in Congress or like Ukraine. You could just tell that the eyes of the readers were on the national, international scene a whole lot more than the local. And when we launched the Tucson agenda, one of the things I wanted to do was kind of be like a voice in the community for like what's going on, someone that you could like kind of turn to who could tell you like, here's how to connect these dots. This is what's going on. But when I started doing it, is there are not enough dots to connect. There's just so you like. Well, I've kind of transitioned into doing like meeting coverage, which is I love it. It's so fun. It's one of these things that in the journalism world is kind of looked down on, but I feel kind of I'm very grateful that all of a sudden I get to do this again, because I'm writing briefs about like the school districts doing daycare, or sales tax election. The city council kind of said they were going to put on the ballot, never said what it was going to be, like weird stuff like that. But just like the daily functioning of government, like it's great, but it's just not done enough. So we don't have the dots to connect. So I've had to kind of get back to doing like the grunt work of local journalism, and it's been a pleasure. It's been fantastic. But it is when the journalism is about accountability for what local officials are doing, but it's also meant to like inform a conversation, and so that conversation can't function without local journalism. And so you kind of have to, like, as a member of the public, if you aren't getting that steady coverage, you kind of have to like infer what's happening, what your city officials are doing, like their motives for doing it. You don't know. And I feel like that kind of bleeds into like the way we look at the national politics as well. Is we're all trying to fill in these gaps. But on the local scene, you need fodder for thought. You need to have like the things being done told to you. What's the deal before you can start like connecting the dots on your own, having conversations with your neighbor about X, Y, and Z. Like there's basic reporting that needs to get done, and it does not get done. Yeah, and then so I just canceled our subscription to the Star for many reasons, and was looking for alternative sources for local news. This, from our perspective, like business-wise, like that's a success to us, right? That means that someone has been like, we see value in what we're doing, what you're doing, and I'm taking my money that I was giving to them, now giving to you. It also breaks my heart to have, because I think the Star needs subscribers to thrive, to continue. But this is we're trying to offer the best products we possibly can. And the other one is, this last one is, finally dropped a paper copy. This is something that, like I said earlier, like I, for a long time, really supported print subscriptions. I really supported print as like the medium, the thing that you can hold. Part of your morning ritual is great. But over the last couple of years, no, I think that the print is kind of getting in the way. I think it's stopping the next thing from being born. So those are the comments that we get from our readers. But I wanted to point you over here to this chart. And this is from Pew Research. And it is, as traditional outlets decline, more Americans are turning to online forums such as Facebook and other online-only sources for local news. And so I think that this is very telling about the moment that we're living in. What this chart shows is changes from 2018 to 2024. And so over the last 6 years right there, you have more people getting their local news and information from friends, family, and neighbors, which I think is a very traditional way of people getting news, right? Going back to the birth of civilization. But also, I'm very concerned about what do your friends, family, and neighbors actually know? And if they become a hub, if you have your neighbor who comes off as really knowing, they really know what they're talking about, um, you need someone to vet what they're saying. My concern is that you have that person saw something on Facebook as they were scrolling, and then they have a reputation of knowing what they're talking about. So in their neighborhood, everyone goes to them, and the basis of what everyone ends up knowing is a Facebook post that this person saw, and that's just absolutely tragic. But then you see, like, we talked about the decline in newspapers, but you also see the TV news stations. Those are down a little bit. It's still really high. It's like, 70% to 64%. That's a good chunk. Radio stations, I would assume a lot of those are either, like NPR affiliates, or like talk radio. Talk radio stations, that is a thriving industry. That one has kind of snuck up, I think, on the newspaper industry. A lot of people are getting their news from talk radio. And then look at that, the online forums and groups, Facebook groups, Nextdoor. These are great places to share information, right? Can flow so easily and so quickly. But I'm sure a lot of you have experience personally, also having read about it in the news. Man, like rumors get passed as easily as vetted information, and that is not good. Look at it's 14% increase in the online forums or groups, which is essentially virtual friends, family, and neighbors. So it looks to me like there's a lot of information flowing, but the original reporting, the actual verified information, I do not know how much of that conversation is based on verified information. Local organizations, this also is an intriguing thing to me. That grew 4%. I would imagine a lot of you are members of, churches, neighborhood associations, things like that, where you do have somebody who is checking the news and is gathering all this stuff and to put together like a newsletter every week or month or whatever. And that's super intriguing. And for me personally, I would really like to get hooked into those groups locally, because I do think there's a lot of those groups who are actually trying to have vetted, verified information sharing. They want what they say to actually be true. And I feel like we could be very valuable to those groups. Local government agencies and officials. This is a big one to me. How am I doing on time? 8:30? Yeah. And I'm going to talk about this a lot more tomorrow. But local governments have access to the same online tools as newspapers and radio stations, everybody. They can have Twitter accounts, they have websites, they have newsletters and all that. And as local newspapers have receded, local governments have moved a little bit to fill that void. So, like, for example, our city council members, they'll do like their newsletter of what we did at the meetings, right? They'll say like what we voted on at the, the city council meeting or whatever. And that's well and good. And I think that a lot of them are, they're honest people and they're trying to like inform their community, and that's great. But also, like, they have to win elections, and so they're not going to highlight information that doesn't make them look good, and they're going to highlight information that moves the conversation in the direction they want it to go. But that, I think, is something that you're going to see more and more as local news outlets recede. You're going to see more and more information directly from public officials, and without reporters there to kind of get in, call out false information or misleading information and all that, I think that the responsibility is going to fall on the public, on you. You're going to be constantly fed this information from public officials who have their own agendas, and it's going to be like you're going to have to either demand clarity from your public officials, totally discard what they're going to say, or something else. Maybe get together and create your own news organization. This one here, newsletters, listservs, that one has actually dipped a little bit, but that's my world. That's what we do. We do newsletters. And so you have right there is like a third of the people get their news from newsletters. And I find that it's a very, very good news organization for news. It's like you opt in. You say, yes, I want to subscribe. Yeah, I want this type of information. And then you get it over and over again. I think it's very promising. And then non-daily newspapers, those are the weeklies. That's the vast majority of what exists now. But as you can see, they don't get they're a third of the top. That's for how many there are. That should be a lot higher. So anyway, okay. Yeah. So this might be a little bit hokey, but where I'm about to wrap up and ask you guys for questions. This is Deadline USA, 1952, Humphrey Bogart. This is one of the final scenes after he has gone head to head with a gangster. He's down in the newsroom, and the gangster's saying, "You better not print that. I'm going to come after you." Humphrey Bogart holds the phone up to the presses, and you can hear all the and on the other line, the gangster says, "Hey, what's that racket?" And then he says, "That's the press, baby, the press." And there's nothing you can do about it. And it's a little bit cheesy, I know, but I wanted to include it here at the end because I want to emphasize that I want you to leave knowing that all across the country, there are reporters who are out there working hard and are doing this type of job, that are standing up to power. That is absolutely still happening. So as we look at the hole that we're in with all these newspapers collapsing and all that type of stuff, I want to emphasize that reporting is a calling, it's a vocation, and there are thousands of people across the country who wake up every day and are doing this type of job. And the best thing we can do is support them in whatever way we can. So yeah, what's next will be tomorrow. We'll get into the future of journalism, and I have a lot of optimism to share with you, whereas today was a little bit of a downer. I have a lot of a bright light I can shine on everything. And yeah, I would like to take any questions you all have.
Great. Thank you.
Maybe this is tomorrow's question, but these students, we had a fella here from OU telling us about his journalism students, his current students. What's going to happen to all of those current students? What sort of an occupation will they have, or what are they going to do?
Yes. So in my experience, and kind of to inform what I'm saying here is, I used to run the apprenticeship program, the STAR. So I would have crop of apprentices. That's what we call them, coming through. So I've dealt with probably, I don't know, like 100, 200, something like that. And I've also just kind of this is done through the journalism school at the University of Arizona. So I've been in touch with a lot of students and a lot of teachers who have taught students. What's going to happen is a very, very small percentage of them are going to continue on and actually do a journalism job. I don't know. I couldn't give you an exact number, but it's going to be in the ballpark, I would say, of like 5%, maybe 10%, something like that. The vast majority are going to go on and do other things. And one of the things that they can do is when doing journalism teaches you how to write, and so that is a valuable skill across basically every industry, you know. And so they'll go. A lot of people they'll go work for governments as like a public relations person for like a county health department or something like that. They'll go work for companies to write copy for I don't know, notebooks. I'm just looking at my desk. A company that makes notebooks, they'll write like our new Quaderno 24 has like the finest paper you'll ever find. You know what I mean? Like they'll do that type of work. But it's generally that they're going to go do something that's not related to journalism, but leans on their skills as writers.
What do you feel the impact of Amazon shopping has done to our local press?
Oh, I don't know. I've not heard of that. What's the? I don't know. Amazon shopping as a place that people can go to without having to consult their newspaper.
So therefore, the local stores are going away. The small stores are going away.
Okay, I follow you. Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that is a whole other parallel process, right? I remember one of the things I like to do is every Thanksgiving and Christmas is I'll go to look at newspapers 100 years ago. You can go to newspapers.com and read them. It's great. And those newspapers were absolutely littered with, the local shoe company, the car dealers, mechanics, the department stores, clothing, all of that. Absolutely, like that underpinned the business model of local newspapers for a long, long, long time. You're absolutely right. Like that's a whole swath of advertising revenue that's gone because those businesses are gone. And Amazon does not need to advertise in your local newspaper. Everybody has heard of them, and that's just not what they don't need that at all. So that's a great one. I'm going to jot that down. Is the loss of advertising revenue from local businesses. But I think like that type of thing is also, you have like Walmart, right, driving out the mom and pop stores. Like that process has been underway for a very long time. That's a really good thing to point out. Yeah.
The term free press has been around for a long time. You've talked a lot about economics, which is related to the word free. But is that all we need to know about the concept of a free press? You've talked about hedge funds. So how do we maintain the ethical standard when the people who give you your paycheck are in the business of making money?
Yes. So So I focus a lot on economics today because I kind of see like that's the issue with your hometown newspaper. That definitely has to do with like the quality of the product, but I think that the larger crisis is the fact that there is no longer a newspaper, or it's an absolute just shell of what itself. And that one I think is that situation is driven by economics. So that's kind of why I focus on that. But absolutely, like the ethics and the value of the free press I could have done a whole other presentation on that as well. I'm glad you brought that up. So in terms of having like the really high up, like the hedge funds own the chains that own the company that owns your local newspaper, I do feel that like within the confines of the newsroom, if it's a healthy newsroom, you are somewhat protected from that to a certain extent. I've never had a moment where working as a journalist where someone has said, no, you can't write that because that company owns our company or anything like that. That's never ever comes up, partly because it's local journalism and this stuff is happening at such a high level, international level. But it's there. You cannot write. One of the reasons it never comes up, like to criticize the company that owns the company that owns your company, is because you know that you're not going to do that, right? That would just cause a problem. So you don't even bring it up. And so that absolutely is a stifling thing. And it kind of speaks to something like when we talk about like the collapse of local news, what we're kind of talking about is the stuff that no longer exists, the news reporting that you just don't get. You can't get upset about something that you don't know about. And so if we had, this is my thinking on it, is if we had, or like actually, I have a real world example. my theorizing. We're at the Tucson agenda. We're free and clear of there is no one telling us what to do. We own this. Like, this is a journalist owned outlet, right? So we don't have to deal with like, oh my God, what would like our bosses say or anything like that. We don't care. There's nobody there to get mad at us. So we get to write, free and clear of all of that. We can write whatever we want about whoever we want. We're obviously constrained by, the ethics of journalism, good taste, right? Decency, all of that is for sure. But it is absolutely, you can just feel it that like what we write is it's just freer than what you see in the kind of stifling atmosphere of longtime news outlets. In terms of like the hedge funds and stuff like that, that to me is not what is stifling in the day-to-day work of journalism, but absolutely it is directives from hedge funds telling, more or less, like hedge funds saying you need to like, hit this bottom line, and I want you to start transitioning into this, that, and the other, telling that to the board of the chain that owns the newspapers, absolutely trickles down, and you end up having to do stupid things like pivot to video, things like that, which is just such a toxic, destructive force in a newsroom. So yeah, if you could, I am pretty sure, I would imagine, if you could get local news outlets out from under the thumb of the profit-seeking goals of the hedge funds and the corporations, I think undoubtedly we would all start realizing what we've been missing for so long. And that's something that, like, if you look at the alt weeklies, like what they used to be, is like here in Tucson, we had our alt weekly. It was so good. Like 20 years ago, they had a column called The Skinny, where they would just skewer local politicians, right? In the way that is you can only do if you're like, I don't care if you ever talk to me again, right? Whereas the more established outlets had to be like, oh, we're the straight-laced, this is the real, responsible journalism, all that type of stuff. But just to be able to say like, oh, that was, expletive, like what they did, what that official did. They were bought by a chain, right? And it just hollowed them out, and all of that is just gone. So 100%, if we could get free and clear of these big chains trying to like create a homogenous product and just shrink everything down just to maximize profits, we would all be having so much fun. It would be a vibrant conversation. Now I'm thinking about the columns from The Skinny from way back in the day. Like, it was fantastic. And that is just absolutely gone from local conversation. So yeah, we get local control, especially I think journalist-owned outlets, and you will start to see the journalism that you used to see years and years ago. You're going to see it again, and you're going to see it in a 21st century version that is instantaneous and is vibrant and colorful, and it would be fantastic.
Kurt, let's try to end on the positive note here. You've been with the Tucson Agenda for a year. Mm-hmm. I know some of us have just recently re-upped our subscription.
Hey, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. So can you just give us a highlight of something that made you so excited and made you feel this is the right direction for you to go in?
Yes, absolutely. I'll give you two. One is when we first launched last year. So all of you who thank you so much, are re-upping your annual subscriptions that were from June of last year. That was a moment where, like, Caitlin and I, like, we took a risk. We were gonna launch this thing, and we didn't really know what to expect. We worked with Hank Stevenson, up at the Arizona Agenda, so we knew that this model could work, and it had worked for them, but we didn't know what to expect. And to see all of those paid subscriptions roll in was, I think, not only a highlight of my year, I think it was like a highlight of my life. Like, it was profound to see, like, there are so many people in Tucson who are aching to have better local news coverage, and they're trusting us with their dollars to do it. And so it made everything possible. It made it possible for us to do this, to keep going over these last couple months. And it also just reinforced that, like, yes, like this thing is good. Like, local news is good. People want it. People are willing to pay for it. They're just not getting it. So if we're the ones who can do it for them, then by all means, right? They're telling us, you are telling us, go ahead and do it. And so that was just an absolute thrill. And the fact that we've had I don't know what percentage of the re-upping on our subscriptions over the last few days, but it is really high. Like, it is. I don't want to put a number out there, but it is way higher than what we expected, and way higher than the norm for a newsletter coming in after their first year. The second thing I would say is, when we wrote about the University of Arizona, for those who don't know, the University of Arizona is our big university here in town, massive research university. And last fall, they came out with, there was this like, whoops, we miscalculated all our money, and there was this huge shortfall in the budget, and it was just a complete like screw up at the highest levels of the administration. Also, there was like hints of like, did they do this so that they could kind of reorganize the power structure of the university? It's very like, it was shady, and what we got from the university was always hedging, like the responsibility for it was they kind of took that on, they kind of didn't. But one of the things that they did was they said, you know, this is a screw up, and we have fired our CFO, our chief financial officer. And that was kind of like the act of contrition, you know, by the administration. We did this, but then we got a tip that they didn't actually fire the CFO. They just moved her to another position. She's still getting paid, you know, like $500,000 or something like that. And so we followed up on it. We did it. And then we went back and saw what they said, and we wrote that story. And that was like, I think that was a story that kind of rejuvenated the conversation about the University of Arizona's financial crisis. It had kind of started to like stagnate a little bit, where it gets into like, okay, so they've created a committee to talk about a revamped financial plan that involves reorganizing, blah, blah. You know what I mean? Just like stuff that needs to happen, and it needs to be done in public. And it's great. But just like that story got to the attitude of these really powerful local people, that it seemed to me like they felt like they had to like deign to talk to the public, you know, about what was going on, when we were all like, you're a public institution. A lot of people in Tucson went to the University of Arizona, are personally invested. I went to the University of Arizona too. I'm personally invested in that university, you know. It's a local institution, and they do not act as if they are public officials. They like quasi. It's just, the accountability is bizarre there. So it was so good for us to like be able to write this story that like it smacked. Like it just showed how this public face they were putting forth. Like no, that's not the whole story at all. So because for us, it's like at the Tucson agenda, it's been, you know, like we got to exist. You know, we have to like, we committed to putting out a newsletter 5 days a week, and we're doing that. I'm so glad we're doing that. But then we're trying to get like better at everything. We're trying to include different beats. You know, we're trying to incorporate different voices into this, and it's constantly like, I can tell you that every single day, Caitlin and I wake up and we try to do the best job that we can. Like that's unquestioned. Like that is absolutely what we do. But it's also like there's so much work, there's so much behind the scenes work with like accounting and all that type of stuff. We're responsible for everything. So to get to the point where we like broke a story about like a big thing going on locally, that like felt like we could do the thing that you all really want us to do, beyond like, or you need us to do, beyond the just keeping tabs on what everyone's doing. That stuff that I think is so important, is absolutely essential. But to be able to like get beyond that, to get to like break news and do that cutting news that I think every newspaper subscriber wants, you know, like, so to be able to like do that, and like, that's our daily struggle, is like to get to that again, you know. So that's what we're trying to do, while maintaining like good steady coverage of all these other things that we just want to keep on your radar. So that was a great feeling.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Kurt. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Great. And we'll see you tomorrow morning at 10:30 Eastern Standard.
Yep. All right, cool. I'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
When we first came out, they were